Okay, great. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Moms Ask Why podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Whitney. On Moms Ask Why, we challenge the norm surrounding motherhood and ask the questions many of us are thinking but might be afraid to voice.
Our mission is to educate, inspire, and empower mothers to reclaim their families and, most importantly, their children's health. Hey, I'm your other host, Chelsea Jules. Today we have Lael Stone, author of Raising Resilient and Compassionate Children. Welcome, Lael. We are so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So, every week we start off our podcast episode with a why of the week. And our why for you is why is it important for parents to develop their own emotional intelligence in order to support their child's emotional regulation and overall well-being?
Okay, just a small question to start to start with.
I know we're
Um,
going to dive right in.
yeah. Look, I think it's one of the most important things that we can actually do as parents, and that's because our children, from the moment they're born, watch us. Our children are watching everything we do, how we interact with the world, how we are in relationships, how we talk about ourselves, our bodies, other people. So our children are these beautiful little sponges that are basically just watching everything we do. So because of that, they create these imprints that they have, which basically tells them, well, this is how we interact in relationships, and this is how I deal with my feelings, and this is how I feel about my body. And because that's it's basically their education really starts at home, firstly, of, well, how do we interact with the world? So when we hold, I think, the importance of understanding ourselves, and we are wanting to work on our emotional intelligence, then what's happening is, I think, as we do more of our own work and we begin to understand who we are and how we interact with the world, and our own triggers and our patterns, as we develop that, then what we are often doing is then we are often modeling that emotional awareness and emotional intelligence to our children. And then what happens is our children absorb that, and then that is what they begin to take out into the world. So, one of the easiest examples is most adults that I've worked with for a really long time grew up in environments where feelings weren't welcome. So, when you got upset or you got angry, maybe you got shamed, maybe you got yelled at, maybe you got smacked, maybe you got sent to your room. And most of the adults, because just basically because of the behaviorism paradigm that our generation grew up in, the messaging was children should be good all the time, or they should be seen and not heard. So as children, when we were little kids, we took on an imprint and narrative that says, well, when I'm upset, it's not okay. So I need to suppress those feelings. I need to shut them down. I need to be happy all the time to keep everybody okay. Many, many different versions of that. So then what happens is we internalize that, and then we become adults, and then we have our own children. And if we don't necessarily lean into that and do the work, then what often happens is we just keep carrying on those same imprints and messages to our children, so that when our kiddos cry, our kiddos get upset, we often switch into that default of what was modeled or what was done to us. So you can see that, as we kind of carry these patterns, often unconsciously, it's we're not doing it because we're often aware of it. We're often doing it unconsciously. That when we are developing our own emotional intelligence, it's asking us to go, well, how am I responding to the world, and what am I taking responsibility for, and what do I want to model to my children, and what are the values I want my kiddos to have in this world, and how do I want them to navigate life and relationships, and am I modeling that? So I think the emotional intelligence really asks us to be curious as to who we are, and what we are modeling and guiding our children with, and then that is when it has the flow on impact.
Yeah, 100%. I think that was so beautifully said. And um, tell us kind of about you. You're a mother of three. I can imagine it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. What was your biggest struggle as a parent?
Mm. So I have three beautiful kids now. They're nearly 25, 21, and 17. And, parenting now is divine. Like all my three kids are still at home. I often joke it's like living in a share house at the moment. It's pretty fun. But they're all about to leave and go and do their things. But I'm just cherishing this time right now that they're with me before they all take off. I think this is the last time we'll all kind of be together. And yeah, 25 years of parenting teaches you a lot. And I think that, I reflect back on those earlier years of parenting. Like most parents, we have no idea what we're doing. And I was a pretty young mom. I had my son at 25. didn't have any kids that had friends, like no idea what I was doing. And on some level, because I didn't have a lot of friends having kids at that time, I wasn't comparing myself, but I also could have really done with a guide. I could have also done with someone who'd been there before me, who'd, raised kids in the way that I'd ideally wanted to kind of just talk to, or just to say, show me how this can be done. So it was a struggle. It was hard. Like I think most parenting challenges or journeys, we don't know what we're doing, and you learn by doing. So there was plenty of times, and I think probably the first 8 or 9 years of being a mum, I really, really struggled. I didn't know how to deal with my kids' feelings. I absolutely had no self-care and no boundaries. So I was kind of in that resentful, angry mum phase for quite a long time. And it was really the birth of my third child where I had a pretty big traumatic experience with her coming into the world, that I realized that I'd had to deal with a bit of trauma, and I had to realize, and I realized that I really had to do some work around how I was turning up as a mom and how that felt. And that was the biggest gift, because that changed everything for me, where it allowed me to learn a lot more, and also begin to deal with some of my past hurts and how I was raised, to then be able to turn up and be the mum I wanted to be. So I say to parents all the time, I have done all the yelling, I've done all the things that I wish I hadn't done. I've sat in those places of guilt and shame and all the stuff that we do as mothers. But I think over time and learning a lot more, and being willing to look at my own stuff, I began to see that mothering can be one of the most powerful and expansive roles that we ever take on. And it's not easy. I think if you want to become spiritually enlightened, then just try and raise your kids consciously. Like that's my vibe, right? You can meditate on a mountain for 10 years, but I'm like, just try and raise your kids with as much consciousness as possible, because it offers you these mirrors all the time to look at your stuff. So, I absolutely stand by the fact that there is no perfect in parenting. We are all doing the best job we know how, but the invitation is to keep looking at our own stuff, and to keep leaning into what's here for me, and what am I making this mean, and how come I'm having this big reaction, and taking care of our own needs deeply, so that we can turn up and be the parent we want to be.
Yeah.
You mentioned boundaries. How can parents set boundaries without feeling guilty, or setting them with also still being gentle?
Yeah, boundaries are such an interesting one, aren't they? Because I think we grew up in environments where boundaries look like this. You either had that really authoritarian power over boundary, where you went to a parent and said, can I go out with my friends? And they'd be like, no. And you'd say, but why? And they'd go, because I said so. And then that was it. No more conversation. You weren't allowed to push back on that. You weren't allowed to say, but that's not fair. And I really want to see my friends. The boundaries were just like, it's here, it's a no, and there's no discussion. Or we swing to the other side, which is where boundaries were very permissive, where if we perhaps asked this way, and then we asked from that angle, and then that angle, and we just kept working our parent, then they'd finally eventually go, fine, just go. So for a lot of people, I think growing up, when we look at our imprints on boundaries, it's rare that I say to someone, tell me if you had a really healthy boundary growing up in your family. And what is a healthy boundary? A healthy boundary is where a parent can say no to something. So we can say, no, darling, I'm not going to go and let you ride your bike outside at 10 o'clock at night. But we want to also then say yes to the feelings that may come from setting that boundary. So often I find that parents are scared to set boundaries, because often what happens is, when we say no to something, if your child's got a big backpack full of feelings, so let's just say they've got a whole lot of stresses and tensions that are going on in their little body because they've been at school all day, or, they've, been with their grandparents all day, or just whatever's going on in the life of a child, and they've got that kind of backpack full of feelings that they're carrying around. You can tell when they're out of balance. And then when we say no to something, children will often use that no as a mechanism to release those backpack of feelings that they've been carrying around. And so that's often why, when we say no, you can't go ride your bike outside, a child might have a really big meltdown. And then for most parents, they're like, I can't deal with the meltdown. So I just will say yes, so that it doesn't happen. Whereas I often look at it this way: if we can look at our children as kind of in balance or out of balance, when a child is in balance, they're usually pretty calm, their nervous system's calm, they feel connected to us, they're usually pretty cooperative, they're very chatty, they're making eye contact. We know when our kids are feeling good. And if a child who's in balance comes to you and says, "Can I go ride my bike outside at night?" and we say, "No, mate, it's too late," they'll probably go, "Oh, it's not fair," but they'll move on pretty quickly. Whereas if a child's got a big backpack full of feelings, when we say no, then they're going to be like, "Well, here's what I think about that," and they get really upset. And we can tell that because the child's reaction is usually way over the top. And that's why I often say to parents, if you're setting a boundary about something and their child's reaction is big, then we can presume that perhaps it's not just about what we're saying no to. We can presume that maybe it's from a really hard day at school and all that pressure and tension's there and now it's coming out. Or, there's some big changes in the family and that feels really big. And then all of a sudden they're using that as an opportunity to release those feelings. So a healthy boundary, coming back to the adult, is when we are calm, we are grounded. So I always say keep your feet on the ground, and I often talk about the analogy of a parent, we need to be the tree. What I mean by that is we need to be one of those big beautiful old oak trees that's got this really solid trunk that's connected to the earth, like you can't move it. It's got a bit of flexibility and sway in its leaves, but when we are the tree, we are grounded and anchored, so that we are saying it's a no, darling, and you can tell me how you feel about it, but it's a no. And we're coming from a place where we are calm and we are anchored. Whereas when we set boundaries, when we're up here doing the like, "I told you you can't do that," and we get into the yelling, we are out of balance then. That doesn't come from a healthy, anchored place. Now, I know parents will be listening going, "Yeah, right. Like, that sounds ridiculous. How can we get there?" But part of the work is for us to keep our own center so that we can set those boundaries calmly. Because what it does is when we set boundaries, we in a healthy way, then it creates this beautiful safe container that children feel that they get that sense that, I can bring anything to my parent and they can hold it for me, and those no's are fair, and they come from a really anchored, calm place, not from a place of reactivity. And I think that's the work that we often need to do when it comes to setting boundaries and limits in a really healthy way. And the beautiful thing about that as well is it also teaches our kids how to have their own boundaries. It also teaches our kids how to have strong yeses and nos when we model that in the home. And then we also listen to how they feel about it.
I love that. You had so many beautiful like visualizations for me. I literally was thinking in my head as you were describing that oak tree, like the next time my daughter or my son has a meltdown, I'm going to imagine that I'm the oak.
Yeah, be the tree.
Be the
100%.
tree.
Yeah, I think the thing is to remember, and this is why it's often a stretch for us, because many of us didn't grow up in environments where feelings were welcome. So when our kiddos have big meltdowns and feelings, it often sets us as adults into this fight or flight response of, "I need to stop this right now. I need to shut it down. There's something wrong. This is not okay." Whereas feelings are very, very normal. And I think that we have to do this big rebrand on feelings in our world to say that feelings are not a bad thing. We're meant to feel them, express them in a healthy way, and then let them go. And our children are learning how to do that by watching how we respond to it. So that beautiful visual, Brittany, of like being the tree next time your child is having a meltdown because you cut their sandwich the wrong way, or because you won't let them go on the iPad, or because whatever. Our job is to take a deep breath and go, they're having a hard time. And my job here is to be the tree, to be that really calm, anchored spot. So those feelings can be released, they can be moved, and then my child can come back into balance, because they come back into balance by expressing those feelings in a healthy way. It's like the nervous system settles, their whole body comes back online, and then they're like, "Okay, I feel better. Now I can cooperate, or I can think, or I can, be kind to my sister, or I can move forward now because I'm not got all that stuff going on."
So, do you think, let's say a child's having a stage, I know you're kind of out of the toddler stage, but I'm sure you remember those toddler moments of like stage 10 meltdown.
Mhm.
Is it more beneficial for parents to literally just like get on the floor with their kids and hug them and just sit with them while they're having a meltdown? Or is it better to try and use words, be like, "I'm here, let's calm down." Like, can our children hear us when we're trying to calm them down when they're having such a huge emotion?
That's such a great question. So, two beautiful things I'd love to say to that. The first one is when a child's having a meltdown, what is often happening, particularly under the age of 7. So, our beautiful little kiddos, their prefrontal cortex, which is that rational, logical thinking part of their brain, it sits at the front of our brain. is still developing, and it kind of reaches a developmental stage around about 7, and then it continues to grow and doesn't fully develop until about the age of 28 or 29, which is why in our early 20s we still do lots of stupid stuff, right? Because that prefrontal cortex is like, oh, maybe that's not a good idea to do that, right? We're still learning and growing. Really, up until about the age of 7, our little kiddos don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to take a moment and go, gosh, I'm feeling really angry right now. What should I do in this moment? What happens is all their feelings and stuff that they've got carrying around come out in these impulsive ways, which is why little kids hit and bite and pinch and yell and push and all those kind of things. Because when they feel frustrated, when they feel powerless, when they feel really out of balance, their body's trying to do what it's designed to do, which is to come back into its center, which does it by raging and crying and throwing themselves on the floor, right? It's like an inbuilt healing mechanism for the brain. And if you know the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel, he always talks about the brain as a hand model, and he talks about the prefrontal cortex at the front of the brain, and underneath the prefrontal cortex sits the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. And in our beautiful kiddos, when their nervous system reaches capacity, or when something just tips them over the edge, that prefrontal cortex goes offline, so the brain flips its lid, and the amygdala needs to reset itself, and it resets itself through that crying, that shaking, the raging, all that kind of stuff. Now, at that moment of a big, beautiful meltdown for a toddler, because that prefrontal cortex is offline, there actually are no words. So when we're trying to say, what's wrong, and use your words, it's not actually registering with our children. And one of the best things we can do is actually get down beside them, get really calm, say what we see, which is like, you're really upset, honey. Let it out. I'm here with you. Keep going. You're doing a good job. And like, that's it. So the less we say, the better. But it really is about our energetic safety that we're bringing to our children in that moment to allow that storm to pass. And I'm sure many parents have experienced this before, where you gave them the blue cup instead of the red cup, or something happens and then they just completely lose their mind. And again, it's really good for us to remember, wow, this is a big reaction to a cup. It's probably not about the cup, right? There's a whole lot of other stuff going on. So we don't make it mean, why is my child so difficult, or why do they make my life hard? We're able to look behind the behavior and go, they're having a hard time. So when they do lose it because of the wrong colored cup, our job in that moment is to go, right, I need to keep them safe. I need to give them this beautiful safe container for these feelings to move. So you might get down on the ground with them. Again, some children want to be touched, some don't. So it's really tuning into what your child is. I often just used to sit near them and just go, you're doing a great job. Get it out. I'm here with you. Keep going. But again, we kind of don't want to say too much, and we just allow the storm to pass. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this, where the storm passes, the anger and the rage, then it moves into those tears, and then it kind of moves into those sobs. And then they kind of come close and want to cuddle and put their head on your chest. And then they often just go, what's for dinner? And then they just move on, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that, right? And this is where we see that beautiful evidence of that storm has passed. All those big feelings that have been sitting there have just moved, and now the body's come back online, the brain's come back online, and now they're like, oh, okay, let's go outside and play. Now we're usually sitting there like, what was that? Like, we've just been hit with the hurricane. But in that moment, what's happened is their beautiful brains and bodies have done exactly what they've needed to do, which is release all those stresses, come back online. And so I say to parents, look, after they've had a meltdown, are they more cooperative? Are they being kinder to their siblings when they play? Are they more willing to go to sleep? Like, we have to look for the evidence after the storm to say, yes, I can see that their whole bodies have come back online. And even more than that, I mean, I just say to every adult, if you were 3, right, and you'd had a really big day and all these things were going on, and then your sister took your toy, and then you got really angry because they took your toy, what is it that you would want from your parent in that moment? Would you want them to just tell you not to be so upset and don't be ridiculous, get another toy? Would you want them to send you to your room and say, come out when you're happy? Would you want them to mock you and say, don't be so stupid, it's just a toy? Or what would you want in that moment? And I think what all of us would want is an adult to come and sit down and say, oh, darling, it's hard when your sister takes your toy, doesn't it? Tell me all about it, and hold that beautiful space for them to express their upset, so then they can again come back online. So I think one of the beautiful things as a parent, as a guide, is to often put ourselves in the position of our kids. You know, if I was 10 and my friends weren't playing with me at school, what would I want from my parent in that moment? Or if I was 15 and didn't get picked in the basketball team, and what would I want? Would I want my mum to come in and just tell me all the reasons why I should train harder and keep pushing and all that kind of stuff? Or would I want her to come and sit beside me and just go, oh, it's really hard when things don't work out the way we want, and I'm here, and you can tell me all about it, and just be there with it? Because I think after listening to thousands of people's stories, I know that all we often really want as humans is to be seen, is to be deeply seen, and to not be fixed, but just to be listened to and to be held in our stuff. And then when we feel that, it allows us to process it and move it in a healthy way.
Yeah, so basically what I'm hearing is validate and then provide space for your
Mm.
child to talk. Like that could be like two things that parents can really think about, like a two-step hack
Mm.
almost.
Yeah, yeah, and I spent 5 years teaching sex education to teenagers in secondary schools, which was a very fun job. And for some people, that sounds like their idea of the worst job in the world. But I have to tell you, very fun, and nothing will ever shock me ever again after working with teenagers. And every teenager I worked with, I asked the same question to, which was, if there was just one thing you wished your parents did, or there was one thing you wished your parents knew, what would it be? And 85% of the kids would say the same thing. I just wish my parents would listen. But they wanted three things with the listening. Like, the first thing they wanted was for the parent to listen to them without judging. So that when a child was coming to them saying, this person's kissing this person, or they're doing that, that we weren't going in with this judgment of, well, why we didn't like their friend or what they were doing. So the first thing was they wanted listening without judging. The second thing, and this is probably the most important, which carries on to all aspects of our lives, is that they wanted to be listened to without being fixed. So often when we are listening to someone, in our heads, we're thinking about, how can I make this better for them? And we do that because we love them, especially our kiddos. When we're seeing them hurting and they're having a hard time, every single part of us wants to jump in and make that okay for them. It's like that inbuilt, I love you and I need to fix this for you. And especially if it's connected to something that's happened to us, if it's a friendship issue, or it's we didn't get picked in a team, or we just are like, I've got to get in there and stop you from feeling all the hard things I felt, right? And so often what we do is we jump in with the fixing. But really what our children want is us to listen to listen to hear, not listening to fix. And what that involves is us doing a lot of nodding, and then a lot of like, that sounds hard, and tell me more. And that's it. And then I often say to parents at the end of listening, and you can do this with a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old, you could say to them something like, would you like a suggestion, or did you want me to just listen? And ideally, whatever our kids say, we do. If our child says, I want you to just listen, you don't then go, okay, but here's what I think you should do. And that is one of the hardest things that we do, because we love our beautiful kiddos and we want them to be okay. But part of our job is building that beautiful safety and relationship over years of listening, so that when our kids are adults, or in those teenage years where they're out there taking all those risks, they know that there is nothing too big they can't bring you. They know in their bodies, in their minds, if I'm at a party and something's going down, let's ring my mum and dad. They'll know what to do. They'll come get us. They'll help. And that comes through this beautiful practice of listening and creating that safety. So, we're listening without judging, we're listening without fixing. And the third thing was, what they really wanted was their parents to listen without getting into the drama with them. And again, that's something that we can do. In fact, especially with our teenagers, if they're telling us some big stuff and we suddenly go, that's outrageous, and I'm going to ring the school tomorrow, and this is not okay. Our kids are like, whoa, you can't handle that. And what they do is they kind of shut down and hold it. They're like, yeah, I can't bring that to them because they're going to freak out. We got to practice being like this rock solid, like, okay, that sounds big. Yeah, tell me more. Where we're just, even if we're freaking out, we've got to hold that on the inside. We need to take that freak out somewhere else, to a friend or a listening partner. so that we can actually just be that calm there so that they know, hey, there's nothing too big that you can't bring me. So I always look at parenting as a long game, right? It's not, and if you've got toddlers and that's such an intense phase of parenting when we've got all the big feelings and we're guiding them and all that kind of stuff. But what we're doing when our kiddos are little is really working to set it up so that when they're teenagers, we've got that beautiful connection there where our kids know, hey, I can come to you with anything and it's going to be held. And that's ideally, I think, what we want.
I love how you are answering every question I have. Like you start talking and then I think about something I want to ask. I'm like, oh, she answered it. Like truly, there's so many different stages of parenting, right? Like I'm thinking about where Brittany and I are at, and I'm thinking about where my sister is at. And my sister is significantly older than me, so her kids are all actually the same ages as your kids are. They're in college and then one in high school. And I'm thinking about just the different stages, but it really does, the advice you just gave kind of really does take you from 4 to 14, kind of like you mentioned. Do you have any advice for parents like Brittany and I who struggle with one of our children setting off the other children, which sets off the other kids, which sets us off as parents, right? Like it's a domino effect. How can we control? That's probably one of my biggest weaknesses, to be honest with you. How can we control that
Yeah.
situation?
Oh, I wish we could control it. I don't know if we can control it, but we can definitely do some things to support it. So, again, coming back to this like analogy of imbalance and out of balance, I often say to parents, we want to get into the habit of like scanning our kids when they walk in the room, so that when your kiddo walks into the room, and you, as a mum, you can feel this anyway. You know when your child's out of balance. You go and pick them up from school, and you can just see them across the playground, and you're like, oof, there's something going on for them. You can tell in their body language. You can feel we can often sense it even if they're not in the room, right? Because we're so all attuned and connected to each other. So when your kiddos walk into the room, if we do a quick scan of them, we're kind of scanning where are they? Are they in balance? Are they out of balance? And you can tell. You can tell when a child's feeling good because they're usually pretty open and they're chatty and you can sense it in them. So when we're scanning our kiddos and you're getting a feeling, oh, something's a bit off, I can feel it there, what we want to do again is be curious. Now, what children do is when they're feeling out of balance and when something's off, they are going to try and look for a way to move those feelings. And because their brains are still developing, is because they're still developing that emotional awareness, a 5-year-old doesn't have the capacity to walk into the room and go, Mum, I had a very, very stressful day today. I was, at playgroup all day and children took my toys and I didn't like what you packed for lunch. And one of the teachers was very mean and she spoke in a really hard way. And I have a lot of feelings brewing inside me. And what I really need in this moment is to release these feelings. I need to cry or I need to rage. And so could you just hold space for me to do that? Right. Now, I think we think that a 5-year-old should be able to do that. And I just want to say, most of us as adults can't even do that, right? When we've got big feelings, what do? We pick fights with our partners. We yell because they pack the dishwasher the wrong way. We
It's
don't
so
even
true.
own that, right? We are often trying to discharge all our stuff by projecting onto others. And so when we look at our beautiful little kiddos, we have these ridiculously high expectations that they should have emotional intelligence to just be able to come in and say, I'm feeling really displaced at the moment because there's a new baby in the family and that doesn't feel good for me, even though everyone tells me how great it is. I don't believe it, right? And so therefore I'm really upset. They can't do that yet. So what do? They're trying to move their feelings. They're trying to find their own sense of power. Well, the perfect way to do that is with their siblings, is to go up to a sibling and pick a fight or to take what they're doing because, for that child, they're like, I want to feel powerful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to power over you, or I'm going to try and move all these feelings that are stuck in my body. I'm going to pick a fight with you because I know you're going to arc up back. And then all of a sudden I can just like, unleash on you, right? So we've got to look at why our kids are doing this. And often it's got to do with feeling powerless. It can be just a big buildup of feelings. It can be because they're trying to assert their place in the family of like, I don't feel like I get enough time. And so, if I act in this way, maybe they'll give me some more time and attention. There's many reasons why they're doing it. And often our kids aren't even aware of why they're doing it. They're just acting in that way. So our job as a parent is again to get so curious when we're seeing our kids out of balance and we're seeing them start to act out. It's our job to be like, oof, there's something going on there. And it's our job to get in there if we can. So if you've got, say, your 5-year-old going to start to pick a fight with, the 3-year-old, our job is to get in there and be like, hey, mate, I can see that you're wanting to take, what Charlie's got there, and Charlie's playing with that, but I'm here to help you. Right now, he might push up against you and go, no, I want what Charlie's got. And you're like, yeah, I hear you do, but I'm not going to let you take Charlie's toys. I'm here to help you. Now, you might hold a really calm boundary and they get to push up against you. So they get to offload those feelings that they're trying to take out on the sibling. Or you could come in with, like, some playfulness, so that we might come in and go, oh, I can see you've got little pinchy fingers on your hands today. Let's play the crab game. You have to chase me and pinch me, right? And children cannot resist play. They cannot resist, that. So we move in with some playfulness to bring that connection of what they want. And through perhaps some laughter and play, they get to offload those feelings that are sitting there. There's a few different ways that we can actually do it. But our job, and I know it feels exhausting because in an ideal world, we just love all our kids to just get along and play beautifully, but that's not the reality. And what we often do, unfortunately, is that when one of those kids who's out of balance comes and picks a fight, our knee-jerk reaction is to yell at them and to say, stop doing that. And again, we do that, of course, because we're tired and we're trying to make dinner and we're trying to pack lunchboxes and all the things, right? But ideally, if we can pause and go, oh, they're having a hard time, it's my job to get in there and help them in this moment. So, I often, with my son, who's a beautiful, calm, beautiful, young man, when he was much younger, most of the time he'd walk into the room and I'd see his imbalance and I'd be like, mate, could you please take the rubbish out? And he'd go, yeah, no worries. And he'd just do it. Whereas if he walked into the room and he walked past his sister and elbowed her in the head, I'd be like, okay, something's going on, right? And my job in that moment is to be like, oof, what's happening here? Because that's not who he is. I mean, again, that's not who any child is. They don't feel good hurting another kid. They don't feel good banging up on their, ganging up on their sister or brother. They're trying to move what's sitting in there. And I think it's our job as a parent to get really curious about that, not make them wrong, but go, what is their behavior? They're waving a red flag. They're going, I'm having a hard time. Can you help me? And it's our job to be able to decipher that and help that shift and move.
When you said they feel powerless, a little light bulb, like ding, went off in my head because we recently moved. My son is almost 3, my daughter is almost 5. And when we moved, my son really got like very physical. He'd bite his sister, he would scream at her, and then that would set her off, and she would start crying. And I was like, when you said that, I was like, he probably also, and he's had a tough time with the move. That's his way of like saying, I feel powerless from this shift.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I think the thing in that moment is how beautiful that you can see that. It was like, how do we help that powerlessness, right? Because, yeah, moving house for a 3-year-old's massive, right? Like it's
Right.
huge. So, one of the things that we can do is something like called power reversal games. This is something that I learned from aware parenting, where we basically create games where he gets to have the power. And these are games like he's the boss of you. Like, so it could be simple things like you put him on your back and he has to tell you which direction you go. And so you go this way or you go that way. Or he has a magic wand and you're only allowed to move when he dings you on the head, right? Power reversal games are games where you might be wrestling or rumbling and he pushes you over and you fall backwards and he giggles laughing, right? Like you probably
Right.
do a lot of these things already, but these are games where they actually have the power and they get to be the boss of you, or they get to do things and then you have a reaction. And I think all kids need to play power vessel games because children feel powerless quite a lot of the time. So, if you are seeing lots of your signs of your son doing that, I would really up the play and the power reversal games. I would be wrestling and rumbling every day, which is where you have pillow fights, where he knocks you over, where he's stronger, he's faster, all those kind of things can be beautiful things to do. So, whenever we're seeing that kind of happen with kids, my first thing is go to the play first. Like, how can we move some of those feelings? And then the other thing would be holding space for the upset of what it feels like to move. Now, he's not at 3 going to be able to say, gosh, it feels really upsetting moving house. I don't know where I am anymore and it feels big.
Right.
He's just going to have tears. because it's time to go to bed, or he's going to have tears because you're asking him to brush his teeth, or he's going to have tears because you're making him put the Lego away. And again, our job in that moment is to hold space for those feelings, not try and fix it. Just the more he can get out, the more he's going to come back into balance, the more he's going to find his center. So, when we combine the listening to the feelings with the power stuff, we begin to see that it shifts. Because even if you keep saying to your son, don't bite your sister and stop pinching her, and so it doesn't, no matter how many times you say it, he's still doing it, right? Because
Right.
it's not a cognitive thing here. It's not like, oh, I shouldn't do that. It's just like, I feel so upset, or I feel so powerless, that I'm just going to do whatever I can to try and move it. So we have to meet it on that level. It's not necessarily a, use gentle hands and keep saying it, because it doesn't actually often work. Parents are like, I say it 10,000 times, it's not working. I'm like, yeah, because it's not where we need to meet it.
Yeah. Another thing that he said, I feel like I'm Chelsea, but it's just like ding, a light bulb went off. Um, I feel like, of course, us parents, we try and prep, right? So I bought all these books before we moved and trying to prep for the move. And when we moved, my kids really struggled with bedtime resistance. So I made a chart, like here's who's putting you to bed tonight. But at the end of the night, both kids only want me to put them to bed. As much as they love my husband, they only want mommy to fall asleep with them. And that's it. So at the end of the night, sometimes I'm stuck in this 2 hour bedtime routine where I just laid with one for 45 minutes and now I'm on to the other one. How can parents set boundaries, I guess, even when their kids are like screaming, crying, like, no, I only want mommy to put me to bed? Like, how can we do that?
Yeah. It's tricky, and I think it's really important to remember with sleep, particularly, and particularly when there's big changes in our world. Sleep becomes one of those things that feels really delicate often for kids, because sleep is a separation, right? Like when we're going to sleep, we're kind of separating, and that can feel really big. So, and also, I think the thing to remember is when kids get tired, and sleep time is when all the feelings come up, right? So it's so normal and common for children to cry before they go to sleep. I actually see it as a very good thing, because the body, in order to sleep, needs to feel safe. So, that's why they want you there, right? Because they want a parent to fall asleep with. We also need to feel tired, which is usually a given, right? By the end of the day. But what helps children fall asleep is that their body actually feels relaxed. And now, if we've got a big backpack full of feelings and we feel stressed and tense like this, it's very hard for us to go to sleep. We know what it's like as adults, when you're worried about something going on at work, and, you're a sick parent and all the things going on, and you get into bed and you can't sleep, right? And that's why people drink wine before they go to bed, or do other things, right? Because they're trying to help their body kind of go, okay, now I've got to go to sleep. So kids are the same. So it's why they will often jump around and run around before bedtime, which is not a bad thing, because they're trying to burn off all that energy. And it's usually why children will have a cry because their socks feel funny, or the teddy's not right, or I want daddy to put me to bed, or whatever it is, because they're looking for a way again to release those feelings. Now, again, how we work with that, well, there's two ways you could look at it. You could help them before we even get to bed, where what we're trying to do is help move all the feelings before bedtime. So one of the things I love to do is with my kiddos when they're little is we'd have like 20 minutes of rumble time, which is basically after we've had, dinner and a bath, we go onto our bed and we'd all have a pillow fight, and I'd set a timer and we'd wrestle and we'd rumble and we'd laugh and we'd giggle. Sometimes there'd be tears, but I saw that as a beautiful thing, because that's what they were needing to do. So we would burn off all that energy. Then we'd set a timer. And when the timer went off, that would be the boundary. We're not going to do it anymore. Now, sometimes when they're little, they'd be like, no, I want to do longer. And that's not fair. And again, that's where you hold that beautiful boundary and say, I know you do, but we're going to bed now. And we welcome the tears, because the tears are that beautiful release that often then allows them to actually just go to sleep. So, I would find that for most times, my daughter would have a cry before going to bed, and then she would fall asleep within 5 minutes, because she's like, oh, I've got all of that out. That feels easier. Now, I know at that time of night, as a parent, if you've been parenting all day, you're like, I just want you to go to sleep. I don't want to hear about another book. I don't want to have you cry. Like, we are often done at that point. And so I think that's why we get pretty short fuse. But again, I try and reframe it for parents to go that those tears and that connection before bed is actually a beautiful thing. It's helping their body reset, their nervous system calm. It'll actually help them sleep better. Now, you could look at it coming back to the stuff around, I just want mummy to put me to bed. I don't want daddy, is you actually can have a limit around that. You can use it as that's the boundary they're going to push up against. So you could say, when we're having dinner, tonight, daddy's going to put you to bed. And all of a sudden the protest might start then. And that's okay. And really you're just holding it. I hear you want me to put you to bed, but daddy's going to put you to bed tonight and you can tell me how you feel about it. And you just hold the boundary calmly and welcome their tears. Don't try and fix it. Like, see it as just a beautiful opportunity for them to express. Now, because probably, Brittany, there's so much stuff that's been going on with moving house, what children will do is they'll look for any little thing to push up against, to offload. And at the moment it's like, no, we want mummy, not daddy. Now there might be some nights where you're like, yeah, I can put you guys to bed tonight, that's cool, but actually if you look a bit further behind it, they're probably just using that as a way to be like, we want to have some control, but also, if you hold that limit for us, then we're going to get to release those feelings. Does that make sense?
A ton of sense. And it kind of leads me to my next question. Let's say a mom is going on a work trip, right? Or if she is going back to work and or like anything, if parents are going on a vacation, how much prep is too much prep for a toddler, right? Like, are you if mom and dad are going on an away trip or if mom is going on a solo work trip, how much is too much prep? Like the week before, are you supposed to be like, hey, just to let you know, mom is
Mm.
going back to work. She's going on a work trip. She'll be gone for 7 days. Like, is that too much for them to grasp? Like, do they need a visual chart? What does that look like?
I think, again, it depends on the child, but I think information is really, really important. So I probably would about a week before start talking about it. Mummy's going to go on a trip. You get a visual. This is where I'm going. I'm going to go on a plane and I'm going to go here. Who's going to look after you? Nanny, granny and grandpa are going to look after you, or daddy's going to be here looking after you, pictures. And they're going to be with you. And these are, we're going to do 7 nights. Now, for 3-year-old, they don't have really concept of how many nights or whatever. But this is, so you set it up. This is what we're going to do. And then what we're looking for is ways to help our children process that. So children process through play. So often, you might find that your little one starts going, let's play aeroplanes, or let's play mummy going to work. And beautiful, like what a magnificent way for a child to make sense of what's going on. So you play aeroplanes and you follow the child's, directive play of what they're doing, or you play mummy's going to work. What do? We get ready, we pack a bag, we pack a suitcase, bye, I'll see you back again, in a few days. And, and they may play that over and over again as they process it. They also might be like, I don't want you to go. Now, often what we do is we go straight into, but it'll be fine. And you'll have, great time with dad and he'll take you to this. Ideally, what we do is go, you don't want me to go. I hear that. Tell me more. It feels hard when mummy goes away, doesn't it? Yeah. And you hold space, and there might be tears and there might be upset. And we don't jump into the fix on why it will be okay. We just listen to how hard it feels for them. And you keep reaffirming to them, you can tell me that it feels big and I'm here to listen to you, and it's all right to feel upset that mama's going. So sometimes the more we do beforehand, listening to those feelings, the preparation with the visuals, the play, that can be so powerful to help them get ready for when you actually do go. And they still may have feelings when you go, and that is all right. I mean, here's the beautiful thing: as humans, um, we're designed to express how we feel and then let it go. And sometimes it's a work in progress. And so, in an ideal world, we would say, right, I've got to go on a work trip, and the child would be, no worries, have a great time, and we just leave. And then we wouldn't be like, I feel guilty, and it wouldn't feel so hard. But actually, that's not necessarily the reality. The reality is it's going to feel tricky sometimes when we do stuff. And our job is to hold the space of the trickiness if we can.
Yeah, and what happens if a parent stifles those emotions instead of leaving space? Is that kind of a stunt of raising an emotionally resilient child?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we do as humans is, if we don't have a safe place to let out those feelings, we're going to do one or two things. We're either going to suppress them. So, what we're going to do is when those feelings feel big, I need to do something to shut them down. So, in little kids, that can look like eating all the time. It can sometimes look like wanting to suck their thumb or being dependent on a dummy. It can be wanting to be on technology all the time, which happens for our little kids, just numbing out on the iPad. It's anything where we kind of disassociate. It can even look like children just being so active all the time that they actually don't have stop and calm. They just kind of go, 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 go. So we as humans, we all suppress at some point. I mean, for us as adults, we know this well. You know, when we don't want to feel stuff, we just binge watch Netflix or scroll on Instagram for 3 hours or drink all the wine or online shopping or gaming or like, pick your thing, right? We all do it. And it's not a bad thing. Like we do it at some point because we're like, it's been big, I want to check out. But if we're doing it all the time, that's when it becomes an issue. And especially if we're not expressing our feelings and we're just numbing, that's when it becomes something that we need to be concerned about. So for our beautiful little kiddos, if and this for us is most of us as adults, if we grew up in environments where we weren't allowed to express ourselves, we had to do something to numb it. So, maybe we use food as that suppression. Maybe we we just kept busy all the time. Maybe we numbed out in other ways. So we either kind of move into that suppression when we can't feel, or it gets stirred in our bodies and it comes out as aggression in other ways. So we see this in little kiddos when there's a whole lot of backlog of feelings there. Sometimes that's when they do bite and hit and punch and all that kind of stuff because it's coming out in those other ways. And we see that as adults as well when we have got a big buildup of feelings, then any little thing sets us off. We scream in traffic, or we talk harshly to the people we love, or it's violence. I mean, this is a huge issue in our society. We see men, unfortunately, and I have a lot of compassion for them, were taught from a very young age not to feel. Men have had the message, don't be weak, don't be vulnerable, don't cry, don't feel. So all those feelings have got to go somewhere. So usually they're stored inside. And then whenever they feel powerless, they feel out of control, they feel like someone's making fun of them, then what happens is all those feelings come out in rage and anger and violence. And we see this. We see this with violence against women, and again, it's not just men, mums. There's a real thing called mum rage. I mean, I never knew this existed until I became a mum, where all of a sudden these levels of rage would come out of me when my child wouldn't put these shoes on. And I was like, what the hell is this, right? I'm this really quite calm, passive, peace loving human. And all of a sudden, I was filled with so much rage and anger, which was actually connected to all the anger and rage I'd never expressed in my whole life. I was a good girl growing up. I never got angry. I just made everyone happy all the time. And then I became a mum and I was like, what is this stuff here? So we can see that we either learn to numb it or it turns into this other aggression. And ideally, what we want to do is find healthy ways to express these feelings so that we don't have to go to those places.
Yeah, mom rage is a huge one. I'm actually glad you brought that up because I see that all the time on social media. People are saying that they have mom rage and they have no clue where it came from and they don't know how to fix it. Are Where is this coming from? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but where is this mom rage coming from for a mom that is shocked with it, kind of like you were?
Mm. So I think first, I think there's a few layers of it. Firstly, I think the main piece is when we are not getting our needs met, we haven't had enough sleep, we're not eating, we haven't had a break, we haven't had time to just fill up our cup. Our fuse is so much shorter. So sometimes we get angry and we get really ragey purely because we haven't met our needs. And then when we meet our needs, like we take a break or we get some support or we get more sleep, then we are calmer, right? So the first thing always is there a need that's fueling, I mean, everybody can be a great mom when you've had 12 hours sleep and all the washing's done and there's heaps of money in the bank and someone's made you dinner. We're like playful, fun mom. Like, this is amazing, right? We're all great at that.
Totally.
Yeah, but when we're stressed and we're tired, all that kind of stuff, like, we're human, right? We have to give ourselves grace for being human, So when we are yelling, we need to check in. Is this, what's going on here? I need a break, right? I need some time. So I think the first place is that so often the rage can come because we're not meeting our needs. And we know, and I'm sure you guys are both so aware of this, mothering is so not seen in our society and culture. We are juggling all the balls, we have all the mental load, and we're meant to look fabulous and have a great house and just like all of the crap, right, that we are holding and doing. And these expectations and pressure. And then when we don't meet that, we just, it feels hard, right? So there's that as a piece. But I think the other piece where the mum rage comes from is most women that I have worked with grew up with an imprint of being a very good girl, which means as children, we were taught that we must kind of forgo our needs or desires and wants to keep everybody else happy. So I often say, as good girls, we were allowed to cry, but we weren't allowed to be angry. And for little boys, they're allowed to be angry, but they're not allowed to cry. Now, that is the message that we receive a lot as little girls growing up is about keeping everybody else happy. And even when you think about the mother archetype, right? What we've learned through generations is it's all about meeting everyone else's needs, putting your needs last. It's all about a good mom is one that sacrifices herself for everybody. And that's actually not true. A great mom is who takes care of her needs so then she can hold for everybody else. But our culture is like, feed yourself last, be self-sacrificing. Look how hard you do it, like work, like we celebrate that, whereas actually it's like no, because what happens is when we are sitting in that place, then it builds resentment, right? And then we get to a point where all of a sudden we're tipped over the edge, and then we yell, and then we rage, and we get angry, and then we feel guilty because we shouldn't do that. Whereas actually, I think what's underneath is there's a whole lot of feelings there that have been repressed for a really, really long time. Like I look back on, I had a beautiful upbringing, parents who absolutely loved me, but I never got angry. It was always about keeping everybody else happy. That was the role I played in my family. And so I didn't get upset when somebody said something mean or didn't do something okay. Like, I would just push it down. And then moving into motherhood, where I think we feel powerless a lot of the time and we don't have the support and we're not getting our needs met, then it's like the veil becomes thinner. And all of a sudden, all those feelings that I think I'd sat on for a long time, where I'd never actually gotten angry or said, hey, that is not okay, started to come out. And unfortunately, it came out directed at my beautiful little son, who was the last person that it should be directed to. But it was like when I felt out of control and I didn't feel like I was getting my needs met, that's where the mum rage surfaced. So, what do we do with that? Well, I think the first thing is we acknowledge it and go, you're not wrong or you're not bad. It's probably just a lifetime of suppression that, we have learned. And then we move into this job that we're doing, which is, it's huge. It's one of the most powerful things we do in the world. It's so loaded in many ways. And of course, feelings are going to stir within us. And so, what can we do? We need to find a healthy place to take them. So, maybe that's therapy. Maybe that's, we have these things here in Australia called rage rooms. I don't know if you have them in America.
Yes. Yeah, we do.
Okay. Awesome. Right. Well, that's good to know that all around the world we have rage. You can go to a rage room and smash stuff, right, which can feel powerful. You can go stand on the top of a cliff or a mountain and yell, like give yourself permission to move the anger. Like I started when I first really, was tapping into this mum rage. I was like, I do not want to be like this. This does not feel good. I'm taking it out on my family. I was like, I got to find a healthy way to move anger. And anger actually needs movement. I think this is one of the things that we don't realize in our culture. When we get angry, we just say, just breathe, and I'm all for breathing, but actually anger needs movement. It needs to shake, it needs to push, it needs to jump, it needs to rip, it needs to snap. So what I would do when I start to get angry is I put on music and I'm like, I'm going to do angry dancing. So I'd say to my kids, you can join me if you want. And we put on loud music and we dance and shake and yell, and moving it through my body would instantly help. Or sometimes if I couldn't do angry dancing, I would just shake. I would just stand in the kitchen and shake my body to just be like, right, I've got anger, I've got feelings here. I need to move them through my body. Or I'd stomp, or I'd go outside and I'd yell at the trees, or I'd snap some sticks. Like I was wanting to model to my kids, there are healthy ways to move anger. Anger is not a bad thing. There's just healthy ways to move it. It's never okay to project our anger onto someone else, but anger is a messenger. It's just saying my needs are not being met. It's saying my boundaries are being crossed, or it's saying there's some stuff here that's being activated for me from the past that maybe feels painful. And anger is a beautiful mask for those feelings that sit underneath. And I need to have an opportunity to move that anger so we can move through what's going on. So I think that to anybody out there who's nodding as a mum, they're like, oh, yeah, that's me. I'm like, I firstly just want to say you are not wrong and you're not alone. I think our culture has not supported us at all to feel our feelings and express them in healthy ways. And if that's you and you're feeling like that, then please go talk to someone. Please find something to move your feelings in a healthy way. It's going to serve the whole family for you to find a way to move it. And you're also going to model to your kiddos beautiful, healthy ways to move anger.
What
Yeah.
I'm getting from that too is like we wanted to ask you, like, what is something that parents, I guess not what is, but how can parents not feel guilty when they do carve out self-help days or self-care time?
Yeah.
And you're basically saying, absolutely not. This is going to benefit the entire family. You should not feel guilty for that.
Yeah. So the first thing with that is, again, I really invite you to look back to your imprints. Like, what was modeled to you around self-care? Think about your mother, your maybe an auntie, your grandmother, your stepmother, whoever was that female figure in your life. What did you watch them do around their self-care? What was modeled to you? Now, most people say nothing, right? They just put their needs last down the line. Maybe they went and played tennis once a week, but that was it. Like there were no, wasn't modeled often to us healthy ways of meeting our needs. So then when we become mothers and we have this imprint of a good mother is one who sacrifices everything and puts everybody else's needs first, then when we're like, gosh, I need a break, then what comes up is all the stories connected to that. So for me, I grew up in a family of amazing women. Like they are powerhouse women, they do incredible stuff in the world. But the imprint I had was this: if you're not doing four things at once, you're lazy, right? No one ever sat down. Everybody was just always doing, doing, doing. So then when I became a mum and I'm burnt out and I'm exhausted and I'd go to sit down, then the thoughts in my head were this: don't sit down because then you're lazy. And I don't want to be lazy, so you keep going. Whereas actually that imprint, that was not a healthy one for me, and I was like, actually, what I needed was probably a mum who was like, gosh, I hold so much for everybody. I need to fill up my cup so I can meet everybody else's. Now, I have a great relationship with my mum, and I remember having that conversation with her, and she's like, going, yeah, sorry, Lael, I just, I was doing what I was modeled. And I was like, of course you were. And I'm like, well, I'm going to change that, because what really made me change it is I looked at my daughters particularly, and I was like, what is the imprint I want them to have around self care? What do I want them to know deep in their bones? Now, they're only going to know that if they see me doing it. And that's what changed it for me. I was like, I want them to know that, they have to listen to their body. And when their body says rest, rest. I want them to know that when they get their periods and they bleed, they can go slow and they can take time, excuse me, to just nurture their body. I want them to know that they can have a strong no. They do not have to keep everybody happy all the time. And they're only going to get that if they're watching me actually do that. So that is what started to create the change. Now, it didn't mean that I didn't still feel guilty for a while. And I had to really wrestle with that belief system and keep asking, is this even true? Or is this just some belief system that I've taken on board from, the culture and the society that I've grown up in? And so it takes a little bit of practice and a bit of evidence to then begin to see, actually, when I met my needs, everybody wins. And so it was tiny little steps. I started by just having a bath by myself at night, right? Even though the kids were banging on the door, and my husband would be like, no, mum's in there by herself. Like, and even though it wasn't relaxing, but I was like, no, I'm honoring me. Or going for a walk around the block, by myself after dinner, or taking a few hours. Like, and I had to really wrestle with all the thoughts that came up, the guilt, or I don't deserve it, or this is, it means you're lazy. And I was actually like, no, what do I want my children to know deeply in their bones? Right. Well, I need to do that. And so it took a bit of practice until I was like, actually, the more I do this, the calmer I am, everybody wins. And then we began to see, I stopped yelling. Everybody felt better. I was more loving to my husband. He's like, this is a great thing. I'm like, I know, babes. I'm like, he's like, it was amazing because we began to see that when we all meet our needs, everybody does better. So it's something to challenge, and I really invite people to wrestle with it for sure, and know that it will be challenging to start with, but the more you do it, the more it becomes part of who you are. And there is not one single part of me now that ever feels guilty taking care of my needs first. I know for me to do the work I do in the world, and to even all the years of parenting in the way I wanted to parent, that it was a non-negotiable that I meet my needs. It's impossible to listen to kids' feelings, hold space with them, do all that beautiful connected play if you don't have your own needs met. You just can't do it. So I was like, if I want to be the mum I want to be, then this is what it has to look like. And that was a conversation I had with my husband. So I was like, and what do your needs look like, for him to be who he needed to be? And so we worked out, how do we have a plan where we both get our needs met so we can turn up and be the best versions of ourselves? And it only serves everybody when we do that.
I love that. I feel like we could talk to you for 3 hours. Like
Yes,
I'm looking at the
100%.
clock. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to wrap it up. But I think the key takeaway is be the tree. It's okay to yell at the tree, right? And carve out some time for yourself. We didn't even get into the school. So, Lael, tell us, where can people find you? I think I saw like a movie or a documentary coming out. Give us all your social handles. Tell us everything.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So you can find me at laelstone.com.au. I am the only Lael Stone in the world at the moment on Google, so I'm pretty easy to find. So that's nice for my parents give me a weird name. Um, so you can find me there, and on social network. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and all that kind of stuff at Lael Stone. I have lots of courses and stuff on my website. I run like 8-week immersions for parents to help them, dive into their imprints and their stories and all the tools. So I do that a few times a year. I have lots of just webinars and courses on there if people are interested. There's a documentary that I'm in, which is an Australian documentary called Seen. It's coming out in March, and it's a beautiful documentary that's pretty much talking about a lot of what we're talking about here, how we were raised, how that imprints and impacts how we then parent, and how we can do the healing work. I don't believe there's a documentary like it out there. It's really beautiful. So I'm in it with quite a few other experts, and we follow the journey of some parents, and it's really beautiful. And yeah, it's I'm really excited to be part of it, because I think it's just opening up this really important conversation, for us. So yeah, so they're all my beautiful things. I have a book called Raising Resilient, Compassionate Children that you can find on Amazon, and my second book is coming out this year. Which is really exciting, which is all about our imprints, what happens to us as kids, and how that impacts who we are in the world in many different ways. So that will be out in August this year.
Amazing. Well, we'd
Love
love
that.
to have you back on to talk all things. Lael, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that was so beneficial for me and Chelsea, and I know that will help so many
Yeah.
moms. And thank you to our listeners. Check us out. Drop your email at www.momsaskwhy.com. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Moms Ask Why, TikTok at Moms Ask Why Podcast. And as always, follow, rate, and review Moms Ask Why now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Lael, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.